A story came out of California this week and sparked the November election campaign, which is now beginning to smolder and crackle. I will tell you the story in a little while because it clocks the moment in a national election campaign when the high-minded oratory flops into the gutter, when the balloon of statesmanship is pricked by the jab of invective. Mr. Richard Nixon, the former vice president, is, as you know, trying to make a comeback by ascending the diving board, which so often in American history has catapulted a man into the White House. He wants very much to be a governor, to be governor of California. He is, of course, nationally a more arresting and famous figure than his opponent, Governor Pat Brown. But Governor Brown has several tough things in his favor. First, he's the incumbent, and it's always a help to be sitting on the patronage barrel instead of trying to lease it. Then he's a Democrat in a state where 3 Democratic voters are registered for every 2 Republicans. Then California's borders are invaded by 1,200 new people a day. Most of them have left industrial cities in the East and the Midwest and have a prejudice in favor of the Democrats and the union rules. Now, Mr. Nixon may win by a vast majority, but only after Election Day will he be able to say that he knew it all along. Mr. Nixon opened his campaign last week and went plunging and flying all around the state. It's quite a state to have to electioneer in, since it stretches from Edinburgh to Naples. Its social problems are staggering, for with all those immigrants, it's having to build new towns in valleys, on mountainsides, even in the desert, and it builds more of them in a month than other states build in a year. By December of this year, California patriots will be ready to clink the glasses and blow their tops, for their state will surpass New York as the most populous in the nation. At the next presidential election, California will have more delegates than any of the other 49. California will be, for all political purposes at least, the first state of the Union. So more and more we look to California for the new leaders, the new trends in American life, the new nonsense. Mr. Nixon's campaign got off to a very peculiar, and to Republicans in the East, a very bewildering start. What do you think is the big issue in this campaign? Water, roads, housing for the new settlers, schools for their children, a 3rd vertical level for traffic in the seething, choking city of Los Angeles, which already has more freeways and superways than all the cities of Western Europe combined, and is now thinking of a monorail, so the population won't stop dead in its tracks in about 5 years. Taxation, farm bills, conservation, or on a more touchy national level, the Kennedy family, Jackie's visit to Italy, the still sluggish stage of economic growth? None of these things. Mr. Nixon says it's communism inside our borders. He seemed to be talking about California, but only because he saw his chance to make his own state a model of vigilance, a rampart against subversion and boring from within. Mr. Nixon may well have alarming evidence that we've lately been too complacent about the power or the machinations of communists inside the country. But his own party, including his own ex-Chief General Eisenhower, believes, when challenged, that the communist issue died with the late Senator McCarthy. It's an extraordinary theme to take up again with such fire. Anyway, Mr. Nixon wants every California schoolchild to take courses in the strategy and aims of communism. He wants the state legislature to start a new and vigorous campaign to sleuth and ferret out subversives and communists wherever they are suspected of hiding. You all know something of the much maligned Federal House Committee on Un-American Activities. When that committee was riding high, when Fuchs was caught and Hiss convicted and sent to prison, many states got themselves their own legislative Un-American committees, which did not noticeably conduct themselves with the nicety or strict legality that legislative committees ought to. The trouble with all such hunts is that they are conducted by politicians, not by judges. That's to say, by men whose prospects of election depend on their sensing and responding to the popular mood. The popular mood in the early 50s was feverish and ugly, when a man's political opinions or patriotic loyalty were in question. And California was particularly notorious for its flat-footed invasion of the fundamental right of a citizen not to be condemned before his guilt was proven. The California House Committee on Un-American Activities has not died. It's been snoozing lately. Now Mr. Nixon promises to wake it up and hand it the whip. It is not good news for people who had thought that Mr. Nixon found the proper measure of his great ability and moved into the more commanding horizons of statesmanship when he became vice president and was privy to all the documents from home and abroad that the president, and only the president, usually gets to see. It's frankly a puzzling start to Mr. Nixon's campaign. He recalled even the bad old days more startlingly by mentioning 30-odd Democrats in office who were communists. He didn't say their names. Now, Mr. Nixon, whatever else he is not naive. He must have good reasons for making this unsavory choice. We all know that he came to public notice, first as a congressman and then as a senator, in 2 election campaigns in California in the late 40s, which were described by his admirers as rip-roaring and by his enemies as brutal. It's very hard to document these reports, to judge in print after the event the dreadful things Mr. Nixon was said to have said about Mr. Jerry Voorhees and Mrs. Helen Gahagan Douglas, who were his opponents and his defeated victims, when he was riding the highways and the back country of California. It should be possible to go back to the newspaper files and confirm or refute what the Democrats said Mr. Nixon said. I've done it myself, but I've had no luck. The curious fact is that when Mr. Nixon was running against Mrs. Douglas in 1950, other and more nationally colorful figures, Mr. Truman in particular, were on the road in cities nearby. The day-in, day-out coverage of Mr. Nixon was left either to local reporters or to string reporters of the agencies. Now, it's a strange truth that not one American reporter in 100, good or bad, superlative or awful, writes shorthand. And when a politician is hitting the whistle stops, he doesn't usually talk from a printed text. He makes it up as he goes along. Mr. Nixon made it up, hot and tasty, as he went along. Democrats still shudder at what he said, though none of them can quote it. There is no record. As the man in the song said, I just heard. Well, Mr. Nixon spent the next 10 years living down the bad name of those dark days on the stump. He became something else. He challenged Kennedy on the high road and forgot the low road that had, we should remember, given him such whopping victories in his own state. Somebody must have now decided either that domestic communism is rampant again, or that Californians are ripe to believe it, or that we're all so frustrated by not being able to haul off and sock the Russians, or even the Cubans, that a good ding-dong attack on the communists will release the aggression bottled up in the Californians' breasts. Or, there's another explanation, that Mr. Nixon won the nomination over an extremist, a man who spoke for the weird but passionate fringe groups in California, who go about demanding to have the Yugoslav flyers ousted from the training fields of Texas, who say that fluoridation of water is a communist trick to give us all cancer. This is not a joke, it's an actual slogan out west. Who say that we should invade Cuba, who find communists in powerful places and hobgoblins everywhere. In the California primary election in the spring, Mr. Nixon disowned such people, but since then he has accepted the support of the man they would have voted for if he'd won. This sounds cynical when it's telescoped as swiftly as this, but Mr. Nixon cannot afford, remembering the 3 registered Democrats to every 2 registered Republicans, He cannot afford to spurn any Republican votes at all, no matter how far out. The best guess is that he is making an instant appeal to these people, or has private evidence that California is ready for a big and boisterous swing to the right. It's all very hazy out there on the Pacific coast, but the coming majesty of California, the superior weight it will carry in the 1964 conventions, make even so wild a rumor as this something to ponder, especially if a politician as sharp as Mr. Nixon appears to believe it. Now, no one is more alert to the ebb and flow of power in this country than Harry S. Truman, who at 78 has decided to get into the congressional election and throw his weight around wherever it's needed, and some places it isn't. Typically, he sniffed the way the wind was blowing, and he headed for California. He is, to make the understatement of the year, no admirer of Mr. Nixon, and he turned up in San Francisco licking his lips and flexing his political muscles, and Mr. Nixon fell into his lap. Mr. Nixon, as I said, announced one evening last week the campaign issue, communism. Mr. Truman heard about it in time, and the same evening told a rollicking audience that this relapse of Mr. Nixon was easily explained. When he left the low road for the high road, he just found the rarefied atmosphere was too much for his blood. A reporter then recalled that when President Kennedy came to California last spring to speak at university exercises, Mr. Nixon had merrily welcomed him but called him a carpetbagger. Now, this requires little background. A little less than 100 years ago, once the Civil War was over, the beaten and disorganized South was invaded by northern businessmen and office seekers who made up to the Republicans in power and then exploited the South for their own ends. Labor was cheap and food and goods were scarce, and there was a fat killing to be made by any smart man who had a line or a product to sell or influence to barter. These detested and often detestable men were known as carpetbaggers because many of them certainly didn't intend to settle in the South. They were on their way through, and sometimes they had to skip town in a hurry, and a carpetbag was ideal for their act. They could get everything they needed for a night's stay or a month's in a carpetbag. So the reporter recalled this characterization of the president by Mr. Nixon as a carpetbagger. What, Mr. Truman was asked, did he think of it? Nixon, Mr. Truman crackled back, doesn't know what a carpetbagger is. If he did, he'd be one.